Oh yeah, I'm going to record it as well, but I'm going to pause that for. There we go, cracking. And as a very nice end to a really great week, we have with us today Tony Rath, who is a professional photographer who is usually based along the shore of the Caribbean Sea in the picturesque town of Dangrigga, Belize. But he is currently living in London at the moment with his wife, who also happens to be Belize High Commissioner to the UK. Very exciting. He is a trained marine biologist and has worked as a diver and an underwater photographer for the Smithsonian Institution, diving on oil rigs off California, captaining a sailboat across the Atlantic Ocean and through the Mediterranean and North Seas. Tony first visited Belize in 1979 and moved there permanently in 1988. Since then, he has explored and photographed most of Belize by land, sea, and air, as well as neighboring countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. And he's now photographing our little green isle as well. And discovering the differences between nature in Belize and nature in the UK, which obviously has quite a big difference. So I'm going to shut up now, pass over to Tony. If you have any questions along the way, please do pop them into the chat. They can be as technical as you want as well. I'm sure Tony won't mind answering some very specific questions too. So please get involved. And Tony, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if this will work. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is very quickly a little bit about me, which Talia pretty much covered. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my country, Belize. I'll tell you how I use stories, my photography and stories to get messages across and try to make change. And then I am going to talk about in-depth storytelling in a place called the Cheeky Bull in Belize. And also what I learned about being a photographer from living in Belize. Then I'll talk about the photography I've done in London and the UK. So feel free to ask questions at any time. As Talia said, you can put them in the chat. I was born in the United States. I entered the Air Force. After the Air Force, I was a diver on oil rigs off California. I've worked for the Smithsonian Institution in Belize. It's a lot like your Natural History Museum here in London. I took an early retirement at the age of 23 and sailed for 7 years. So I felt better to take my retirement when I was young rather than when I was old. And then I moved to Belize in 1988, and I've been photographing professionally for 30 years. I've worked mainly in Central America, but I have traveled extensively around the world with doing photography. And last year I moved to the UK with my wife when she was appointed the Belize High Commissioner of the UK. And what you're seeing next to me there is my best friend Chico, which I had to leave in Belize when I came to the UK. Funny story, my wife had to meet the Queen, and we got to talk to the late Queen for about 20 minutes. And she asked my wife what she missed most about Belize. And my wife said her grandchild. And when she asked me what I missed most, I said my dogs. Well, for the next 10 minutes, we talked dogs, which I thought was pretty amazing. Okay, now a little bit about the world that I've lived and worked in for 40 years. This is a very short video. It's actually a trailer for a longer video. And let's listen. That video was actually a trailer for a tourism, much longer tourism video. And the amazing thing is that it was done 20 years ago. And Belize is still just as pristine as it was. Well, I shouldn't say just as pristine, but it's still in very, very good condition since that video was made. So Belize is in Central America, below Mexico, right next to Guatemala. It's a tropical country, and we have 60% of our forests, original forests, are still there. We were a British colony. You might have known us as the British Honduras, and we've got our independence in 1981. So since then, we've been protecting our environment. In fact, as soon as we gained independence, the first laws protecting our forests went into effect. We have 60% of our original forests, I said, and 80% of that 60% is under protection right now. We have national parks, and this is the Coxcomb Basin National Park, and this is the world's first jaguar preserve. So we have extensive forests, tropical forests throughout Belize. That's sort of the environment that I've been shooting in for the last 30 years. We also have mountains. This is Mount Victoria, which is the second highest peak. And this photo is probably 5 years in the making. First of all, I had to find a location where I could set a tripod and a telephoto lens to shoot the peak. Then I had to calculate when the moon, full moon, would set directly behind the peak. And then I failed 3 or 4 times because of weather. And finally, the weather cleared. And just a quick technical point, when you take pictures of the moon, your exposure has to be less than a second. If it's more than a second, the moon will move in that time. So, and if you're using a telephoto lens, it'll move even faster. So you have to adjust accordingly. The western portion of Belize is thick jungle, and a lot of it is limestone. So we have a lot of limestone, which is actually ancient coral reefs. This area once was underwater. And those limestones support tremendous amount of caves. And so we have these sinkholes. This is one of the largest sinkholes in Belize, and it's right near the Guatemalan border. But underneath, we have one of the largest cave systems in Central America. So our cave systems are so extensive that when you're in the jungle, you would think there'd be plenty of water, but all that water is underground. So basically, you're going from cave to replenish your water whenever you head out into the jungle. Yes, water. We have lots of water coming off the mountains into so many waterfalls in Belize, and so many that are not visited by tourists. So this waterfall here is in the Coxcomb Basin, and you can go here pretty much anytime, and there's no tourists. And this is actually the bottom part of a double waterfall. So you can walk up around the corner, and you have 2 emerald swimming pools with beautiful tropical waterfalls coming off it. And those waterfalls go into major rivers, which you can see here is the Chiquibul River, which is flowing past a limestone cliff that has caves in it, pockmarked with caves. And we've done numerous expeditions, sort of a first run down a lot of these rivers, just exploring the caves. And you'd be amazed at the Mayans. They have artifacts in all of these caves, ancient Mayans. So the rivers then flow down into a vast wetland area that we have along the coast and also in northern parts of Belize. And these wetlands are at times feeding grounds for hundreds of thousands of birds that are passing through. So it's near the end of the dry season. you'll have, like I said, hundreds of thousands of birds coming in and feeding in the low water. And that really makes for tremendous photography opportunities. So the rivers then flow down through mangrove forests, and these mangrove forests are extensive along all of our coast, and they're one of the richest habitats, natural habitats in terms of biodiversity and in terms of growth. Unfortunately, any kind of development along the coast normally impacts our mangrove habitat. Fortunately, Belize has laws that protect all of our mangrove now. It's now illegal to cut mangrove in Belize. So our rivers are quite diverse, very wild. They'll have all kinds of marine life in it. The tides come up, so you'll get salt water miles up these rivers. So you'll have salt water underneath, and you'll have the fresh water on top. And dolphins, manatees, crocodiles, they all love, we have about 7 major rivers that flow down from the highlands. Then along the coast, you have small villages. Belize only has 450,000 people, and most of them are in Belize City, which is our largest city of about 70,000. The rest are all pretty small, which makes so we don't have huge impacts on our environment in those areas. We have right offshore, we have lots of manatee. In fact, we have one of the largest concentrations of West Indian manatee in the world, right off our shores. And we also have very healthy populations of both the American crocodile and the Morlitz crocodile. And as I mentioned, we have one of the largest cave systems on land in Central America. We have extensive underwater caves also, which are just now being explored. It requires quite a lot of extensive training before you can go into these caves, but they are spectacular. Then as we move back out towards the sea, we have the second largest barrier reef in the world, and it is a World Heritage Site. So it goes all the way from the northern part, 180 miles south, to the very southern part of Belize. So our whole coastline is protected by a barrier reef, which provides so many pluses for Belize, mainly in terms of hurricanes. It'll knock down most of the hurricane surge so that it mitigates a lot of the damage from hurricanes. We also have 3 of the 4 coral atolls in the Caribbean. And these atolls just rise out in the middle of the ocean. It's maybe 2,000 to 3,000 feet deep all around the atolls. And the diving is absolutely spectacular. We also have the Great Blue Hole, which Jacques Cousteau made famous, and it's still a very popular dive site. It's about 435 feet deep, and well, not my favorite dive site. It does have a lot of sharks, so it's an interesting dive site. We also have over 200 coral sand and coconut tree islands, and these are just the epitome of paradise. So this island here is sitting right on top of the barrier reef. So you can basically walk off that sandy beach that you're seeing on the island and snorkel on pristine coral reef without a boat. We have the largest fish in the ocean that comes and feeds off the barrier reef. We have turtles. We have all the tropical life in abundance that you would expect. Where you've heard the demise of coral reefs in the world, Belize is still blessed to have a very healthy coral reef and healthy biodiversity off that coral reef. Maybe just a technical note on this. This is taken with a wide angle lens. So the person is actually a little bit further away from the whale shark. This is just a baby whale shark, actually. This is not a big one. And to make it a little bit more impressive, I kind of pulled away with the wide angle lens so that it makes the diver look smaller and the shark look a little bit bigger. That's probably about a 25 foot shark, but they get up to 35 feet. And of course, with all this tropical beauty, tourism is huge in Belize, and that's one of our biggest problems, is trying to control tourism. But then again, you know, if you visit Belize, probably one of the biggest decisions you have to make is which hammock you want to sit in. So, okay, let me just give you a little example of how I've used my photography to tell a story in Belize and try to make people aware of some of the problems that climate change and sea level rise has. Belize is a small island state, and we have a lot of coastline. Most of our people live on the coastline. So as the sea level rises, we're losing land. And here's an example. So this is a mangrove island well offshore. This was taken about 15 years ago. It's a wildlife reserve. So it's a national wildlife reserve. It's protected. And there were over 400 pairs of frigate birds and brown boobies that nest on this island at any given time. So this was taken about 10 years ago, and you can start to see how the island is slowly shrinking, as are the number of birds that nest there. And here it's taken about 5 years ago, and you can see on the far end over here, we've lost most of the island, and the rest of it is starting to disappear. Here again, it's getting even worse. This sign right here is a sign that declared it a preserve, and that used to be on the island itself. So you can see how much is gone. And this was taken about a year ago. So that's all that's left. So when you show that to politicians, it kind of hits them. So, you know, I've been there long enough now that I've kind of documented the changes that are happening in the environment. And that's my main purpose using photography, is to show people not only the beauty of Belize, but also to show what happens if we don't take care of her. Of course, we have no control over sea level rise, but this is what's happening to us because of it. Now, I also work directly with the non-governmental organizations, most of them in Belize, providing photography services. The one that I'm most involved with is the Cheeky Bull, which is our largest protected area. It's about 200,000 acres of pristine tropical forests.
Chickable forests blanket 500,000 hectares of rugged karst topography along Belize's western border with Guatemala. Soaring above, hidden within, and buried below the largest and most pristine protected area in Belize lives a menagerie of creatures so unique they dwarf our imagination. Far above the canopy, drifting with the wind in a loop-the-loop pattern of rising air currents, floats the king vulture, the royalty of forest scavengers. Silently scanning the treetops for monkeys and porcupines, squirrels and opossums, anteaters and kinkajous is the largest and most powerful raptor of all Central America rainforests, the Harpy eagle. The Chickabel is one of the final strongholds for the brilliant scarlet macaw. These riotously large parrots nest in the trees along the Macal and the Raspaculo rivers. Yet, each morning for 3 months out of the year, they fly east in mass across the entire country to feed on fruit-bearing trees along the eastern slopes of the Maya Mountains. And there is a nondescript gray bird the size of a large butterfly called a slate-colored solitaire with one of the most angelic voices in nature. Early mornings and late evenings under the natural arch, the ethereal song resonates through the forest. And this is just 4 of nearly 300 species of birds that make the forest of the Chickabel home. But there is so much more than just birds. A 1996 survey found 26 species of large mammals living in the Chickabel, including 7 that are threatened with extinction. The king of the wildcats, the jaguar, the stealthy and powerful puma, the shy margay, the smallest wildcat, the jaguarundi, our national animal, the tapir, the rare southern river otter, and the acrobatic spider monkey. If not for the Chickabel, each of these animals could disappear from Earth in our lifetime. In 2001, a short and limited 4-week study captured 15 species of small mammals in the Chickabel and 92 reptiles and amphibians, including 18 endemic species and 37 endangered species have been reported in the swamps, rivers, streams, and the nearly 3,000 species of plants in the Chickabel. As you might deduce from the number of creatures calling the Chickabel home, these forests are the hotspot of biodiversity in Belize. The Chickabel is the great provider of life, a breeding ground and a fountain of biological wealth that is shared with the rest of Belize. That such a marvelous and mysterious habitat still exists and its tenants still thrive is, for the moment at least, a reason for all Belizeans to rejoice and be proud. There is so much more to celebrate than just the animals of the Chickabel. The great unbroken tropical forests are one of the largest carbon sinks in Central America, helping to combat global warming and potentially providing a sustainable income through carbon credits. These forest giants filter the air we breathe, taking in the carbon dioxide heating the earth and exhaling pure oxygen. Developed nations pay us to keep these lungs of the world healthy. The roots of these forests protect and replenish the soils, preventing them from washing into the rivers, out into the sea where muddy floodwaters can bury marine life. Beneath the trees and roots and soils lay hidden one of the largest cave systems in the world. These caves, ancient coral reefs hollowed by millennia of flowing spring and rainwater, build spectacular formations of limestone and are home to unique cave dwellers and many of the 75 different species of bats in Belize. This seemingly endless cave system also shelters some of the most sacred and spiritual artifacts of a long ago civilization. The whole limestone underworld of the Chickabel is a massively spiritual domain for the Maya. One of the greatest expressions of this ancient civilization rises from a broad plateau on the northern border of the Chickabel, the great Maya archaeological site of Caracol. This immense complex of palaces and temples remains today the tallest human-made construction in Belize. With all these wonders and treasures that still exist in the Chickabel, probably the most valuable asset of all is mostly hidden from sight: the water. The watersheds of the Chiquibul are huge, flowing as much underground as above, and eventually enter the great rivers of Belize, providing clean, fresh drinking water for the Belize River Valley, including Belize City, 40% of our population in the country. The healthy watersheds of the Chiquibul provide a multitude of ecosystem services, including nutrient cycling, carbon storage, erosion control, increased biodiversity, soil formation, wildlife movement corridors, water storage, water filtration, flood control, food, timber and recreation, as well as reduced vulnerability to invasive species and mitigating the effects of climate change and other natural disasters. These goods and services are essential to our social, environmental, and economic well-being and are free as long as a healthy Chiquibul exists. We in Belize are now on a threshold of losing much of our natural landscape. We have done unimaginably terrible things to much of our countrysides. It is only along portions of our coast, some remote sections of the northern plains, the monumental landscape of the Maya Mountains and the Mountain Pine Ridge, including the vast Chiquibul forests, that the ancient richness and the wonder of natural life is not yet destroyed. We at FCD are tasked with seeing that it stays that way.
So FCD stands for Friends for Conservation and Development, and they manage the Chiquibul. And I work probably, I would say 50% of my time, my photography is working with them. Unfortunately, it's along the western border of Belize, which means we have a border dispute with Guatemala, and there are a lot of Guatemalan poachers that come in. And so I use a lot of my photography to document the damage that the poachers are doing. So on the right-hand side, you could see flying, that's the Chiquibul Forest. And if I take the camera and move it over to the left-hand side of the plane, the other side is Guatemala. So you can see what we're up against. They've destroyed their forest on their side, and so now they're coming for our side. And so FCD has to monitor the border, and when they monitor the border and they run into poachers, they have to confiscate the poachers. The poachers take wildlife, they take plants, they chop our lumber, they dig for gold, and when they dig for gold, it's very, very destructive. And so we do frequent expeditions to the western border, and here, this is all Belize, and you can see it's all been cleared. And if you look right here, you see a Guatemalan who's still clearing the last bit of the land. And we were with an armed force, so we decided that we should apprehend him. And so I did document the apprehension. You can still see the fellow up here, and here's the interdiction team heading towards him. He has no idea what's happening yet. So here you can see him still chopping. Here's the interdiction team. And here's the man's lunch. So what they're waiting, they're just going to wait here because it's near noon, and they're going to wait for the man to come to his lunch, and that's when they would apprehend him. And when they did apprehend him, he threw his machete in the air, which you can see right here. And we use these images not only to document what the Guatemalans are doing, but also to make the Belizean people aware of the dangers that are happening on the western border, and to try and get support not only from the population, but from the government also. Okay, so I think that's enough from Belize. I just want to give you a quick rundown on what I've learned from working in the tropics. And you might laugh, but I found the most important piece of equipment is shoes or boots. Try working with very sore feet. You just can't do it. Or if you've got a multi-day trip, you've got to make sure you've got the best boots, most comfortable, well broken in. I've learned that over and over again. Now you need to know your camera equipment. What I mean by that is that you need to reread the manual so that you know where the controls are without thinking about it, and actually practice. I mean, I often sit at my desk and think of different things that I want to set on the camera and see if I can do it without looking it up in the manual. And I'll do it over and over again so that when the time comes to shoot, you're not worried about how to set your camera. You can concentrate on all the other elements that make a photo. I've learned you got to protect your equipment from the elements, especially the dust, dirt, and moisture in the tropics. So technical mastery comes from practice, as I said, handling your camera, know where all the controls are, and then you can spend your time on composition, not on how to set your camera's f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, and different focusing scenarios and so forth. So another main thing is you have to look for the light. You really have to study how light behaves. I mean, light is everything in photography. You need to look behind you. You need to keep looking around, not focusing straight ahead. And I'm going to give you an example. I was working with a Maya village. They had a celebration going on. And I walked into one of the buildings where they were doing the cooking, and I saw these ladies, and I thought, oh, that's a nice shot. So I took it, and it's okay. And then I turned around, and I saw this light coming the door with the smoke. And so I light beams and stuff. I thought, well, that's nice. So I started shooting that. And then I looked up, and I noticed that the light was coming in everywhere. And this is one of the most highly published, popular photos that I've ever made, as it shows so much is happening in a Maya village. And if I hadn't turned around and looked up and sort of looked for the light, I might have missed it. So patience is another thing. You have to wait for the light. You have to wait for the weather. You have to wait for wildlife to do what they're going to do. You have to know the behavior of wildlife and the trends in the weather. For example, to see a rainbow, you have to have the sun at your back. So when you see it raining and the sun is on the other side, chances are there's going to be a rainbow. And so you can chase that down. Another thing is to study and copy the work of photographers that attract your attention. That's very important. And to find a mentor or work with a photographer that knows more than you do. Okay, so about a year ago, I moved to London from that place we've just been talking about. And the first photos I took when I arrived in London, you're probably very familiar with the parakeet. Well, I wasn't. I was so surprised to see parakeets that I just started shooting away. And little did I know that they were just going to be there every day. And the same with the foxes. This was a young fox that came out in the middle of the yard. I thought, my God, there's wildlife in London. So then I started moving around London, going to the different parks, photographing what I could find. And I mean, I don't think the biodiversity in England is I don't want to say anything really bad, but it's pretty bad. Most of the parks that I've been encountered are man-made parks. Very little of it is still wild. And so I started looking at habitats, looking at but I just couldn't seem to get habitat shots without getting man's buildings in there also. So I finally decided I'd go to Scotland and see if I could get some really real wilderness up in Scotland. And unfortunately, Scotland is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, but they've lost a lot of their forests also. And here I was photographing a rewilding property. You can see the young trees in the very foreground and the older trees behind them. They've been planting trees for about 10 years now, trying to replenish, but takes a long time in Scotland to go, but it is beautiful. You can see a lot of the young growth. This is all planted, rewild up here, and this is some of the older growth here. Some wildlife, but most of it's pretty tame. And then I saw this really beautiful landscape. This is actually just a talus slope. And my thought was, this is really pretty, but it's kind of missing something. And then the sun, a cloud came over and covered the slope in front. And I managed to move to get silhouettes of the pine trees behind. And it sort of created an interesting shot of the pine trees on the bare slopes in Scotland. So coming back to London, I knew I wasn't going to get much wildlife, so I just started looking at the man-made environments and started looking at all the lines and buildings and different. I mean, I'm sure these shots have been done 100 times by 100 photographers. But what I did notice, a lot of these places had little solitary trees among these tall buildings. And I had just finished reading about how trees communicate to each other through the mycelium in the soil. And I thought, how do these single trees communicate to anybody? I just started feeling sorry for them. So I started taking pictures of these single trees among all these buildings, thinking that they're actually just in a prison, like solitary confinement. And I have a lot more. There's a lot of single trees in London with no chance of communicating with any of their neighbors. So then I studied, I went to Parliament Square, and of course that's been photographed a million times also. So I just tried to do something a little bit different. And I don't know if you know, but if you shoot a speck of light with your lens closed way down, you're going to get a starburst. And so that's what I did with the picture of Gandhi here. And the other thing I thought was interesting was a juxtaposition of Gandhi and Churchill. As Gandhi's looking at him as Churchill's walking away. As you know, those two were not the best of friends in that time. So what I ended up doing was chasing the light. So I started getting up earlier and going to bed later, and I would shoot sunsets. I would get up early in the morning and shoot sunrises. I would just juxtapose everything that's happening in a city, planes and Ferris wheels and moonset, sort of showing how we've taken over the environment. Moonsets behind Big Ben. And one interesting time was I calculated when the moon would be rising behind the city of London, much like I did the moon set behind Victoria Peak in the first photo. And I figured I could get on Waterloo Bridge, and I thought I better get down there early because there's going to be a lot of photographers shooting this moonrise because it was a clear sky. And I got there wasn't another single photographer, and this beautiful moonrise is coming up behind the city. And there's literally thousands of people walking, streaming behind me. And every once in a while, one would stop and ask what I was shooting a picture of. And I would just say, look at this, a moonrise behind the city. And they'd pull out their phone, take a quick shot, and then move on. So you kind of wonder how much nature has sort of disappeared from people's lives that live in London and the beauty of it. So I've tried black and white. Oh, Callie, did you want to stop me?
Just going to say we definitely have some questions coming in if you're happy to wrap up in a couple of minutes, and then we can get into the questions.
Sure. Actually, if you want to go to the questions now, because I was just going to get into some black and white and then something I was shooting over the weekend, but maybe we'll look at the questions first to make sure we have time.
Perfect. Yeah, and actually maybe there might be some technical questions as well about shooting in black and white, because that definitely has its changes. Amazing. Thanks everyone who sent in their questions so far, and thank you for such an incredible presentation, Tony. It's been so great to be able to look at incredible work that you do and have that weaved in with how we tell stories, which is what is so powerful about photography and photojournalism and taking these kinds of images. It's been really great to understand how you tell that story and how you bring in those details as well. We've got a whole range of questions to get into. I guess to start off with, hopefully an easy one. What is your favorite animal to photograph, and what is your general favorite thing to photograph outside of that?
Yeah, that's such a tough thing. It's interesting. Photography, I use photography as a tool to get outdoors. So while I love photography, and when I'm doing it, I really love doing it, it's really just to get outdoors and get to it allows me to go to beautiful places. People will hire me to go to the most beautiful places to experience it and then photograph it. So, picking your favorite location or your favorite animal is sort of like picking your favorite child. I think the one that I'm in front of is the one I'm in love with. Or, any wildlife or any natural area I'm in, I'm sort of in the area at the time. So it's like, I just love all of it. Is that sorry? That's a
good. I mean, what we really want to hear is like a jaguar or something like that. But that's
jaguar, whale shark. Oh, whale shark.
Oh, yeah. That photo.
Sea turtles. I mean, there's just lots.
I guess with that is even a lesson of having that passion for what's there right in front of you and taking time to be in that moment as well.
You're being in the moment with that animal, and then you just have a feeling how beautiful it is and how special it is.
Probably has better impact if you're not just in love with one. You're like, this frog is less interesting than the fox, so I'm gonna take a bad photo this time.
Yeah, something like that.
Michelle's asking, what's been your biggest challenge working in Belize when it comes to photography?
Biggest challenge. Wow. I think probably my biggest challenge now is as I start getting older, is I have to pare down equipment, and I can't carry as much as I usually do, or I have to start hiring somebody to start carrying equipment. I mean, the challenges are the same challenges you're going to have anywhere, with weather, with lighting, and to be kind of try and get a different creative look. But I really don't think about the creativity aspect. When I see something, I'm really just shooting light. So, I mean, there's nothing that stops me from shooting, or nothing that really that I can really just say, this is a huge challenge that I have every time. I mean, I shoot people, I shoot aerials, I'm in planes, I'm scuba diving underwater. Maybe underwater, one of the biggest challenges is making sure my equipment doesn't flood. That's a huge thing. And when you're in, I'll go into the bush for 2 weeks at a time, and you have to make sure you have enough batteries, enough cards. You got to make sure your equipment is well protected from the moisture and the dirt. So you got to keep things clean. It's very easy for things to get dirty in the tropics, just because of the moisture. It's 100% humidity. Oh, maybe the biggest thing is when you're in the forest, you have to keep your hands away from the lens, because what happens is the moisture coming off your body will fog your lens. And then if you're, trying to capture something quick and your lens is fogged, there's nothing you can do about it till it unfogs. And so just keeping your lenses from fogging maybe is one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I'm sure that applies to the UK as well. I think it definitely has some wild moments of humidity here as well. Maybe not in the same jungle way, but I know I always have a fogging lens is something that I have also encountered, even if it is central London. That's a good answer, I guess. Yeah, from a kit point of view, I guess it's your tool, and that's what you're working with.
Tools. Another thing actually is Belize doesn't have access to the equipment, so. Lots of times new flashes will come out, or a new lens will come out, or whatever. It's really difficult to get that, because you have to either go to the States to pick it up, and you really can't ship it in because it's too fragile, and The duty will be, massive on it. And
Mm.
so equipment's a big problem. You can't buy equipment in Belize, so you gotta work around that.
So, and on that equipment note, if you're going out into the field for a day, which lens would you take if you could only take one?
I have a 24 to 105. It's a little slow. It's only an f4. I don't go with one lens because I'll usually take a 15 to 35 and a 70 to 200. And if I'm feeling strong, then I'll take the 24 to 105 also. That pretty much covers the spectrum for me if I'm not doing close-ups. I do have a 100mm macro lens, and as long as I'm not doing wildlife, because I do have a 500mm lens also. So basically, if I'm just hiking around like I would here, I would take the 24 to 105.
So that's your basic kit then. You've got your body, you've got the 24, and then a tripod.
Yeah, a tripod. I won't always take the tripod, but I do have a carbon fiber tripod that's not heavy and it's very sturdy. So yeah, that backpack, cable release, plenty of batteries. Cards aren't so much a problem anymore because you can get them, 128 gig card will last you for quite a while. I do shoot the Canon RS5, so the files are pretty big, but I used to shoot the 5D SR, which had even bigger files. I moved to mirrorless just because of size and weight. So
do you just have one body that you use, or do you find yourself switching bodies?
Usually I have two bodies, but I could only afford one mirrorless just before I came to England. And I'm sort of waiting for the new Canon body to come out. So I'm sort of struggling right now with just one body, but I've always carried two, and on expeditions, I've taken up to 4 camera bodies before.
Why do you take up to 4? That's quite a lot.
Well, because when you're back for 2 weeks remote, if a camera goes down, you have a backup. If you want to carry 2 lenses at a time, one wide angle and telephoto while you're hiking or while you're moving. You might want to set up time-lapse photography while you're working on something. Yeah, so you'll use them, but a lot of it's backup.
Okay, yeah. So different bodies for not necessarily for different styles, different purposes, but more for different purposes and to make sure that you're covered.
Yeah, no, the only time I had a body that's different is underwater. So you have to have a specific housing for a specific camera body when you shoot underwater. But even then I'll have two housings and 2 camera bodies as backups almost all the time. It just, nothing worse than getting somewhere that's hard to get to and having your equipment fail. I mean, it's not professional either.
Whoops, sorry, I forgot my other one at home.
Yeah, exactly.
I can imagine. So we've got a few. We have, most people on the call are sort of our photographers as well. So we've got some questions asking for some certain tips in certain situations. So Joe's asking, sometimes I'm out taking photos and I take some that really tell a story, but they're not very high quality. Others are better quality, but don't capture the story. Any advice for this situation? Does the story trump the quality for amateur photographers?
Well, I think you have to look at the purpose. So if I'm hired to tell a story and the weather's really bad and the lighting's not good, you still have to struggle to capture the story. I mean, you can almost always take a clean photo or a properly exposed, properly focused photo, and properly composed. And if the lighting's not there, yeah, it's not going to be a great photo. But I think if you're out to tell a story, yeah, then the story trumps. But if you're just out wandering like I am right here, I'm not necessarily trying to tell a story. I'm just looking for light. And so, yeah, I guess I could tell a story by shooting it in a different way with a man walking. He's got breath coming out and the forest is breathing and the lights everywhere. So I prefer to shoot pretty pictures. And if I can tell the story through pretty pictures, great. But if I'm hired to tell a story, yeah, that'll take precedence.
I guess, yeah, from an amateur point of view, we're not looking at employment. It's getting that clean shot, unless you want to tell a story and you just need to get that image to tell that story.
Yeah, well, I think the UK Youth for Nature needs to tell stories. They need to show what's happening, what's been lost, what it looks like now, because in another 20 years, it'll probably look worse. So, I mean, it's really good to document also the way things look now, so you can compare them later. So I would think for most of the people in the group that telling a story would probably trump, a pretty picture.
So what advice would you give then to someone who only has access to a phone camera?
Phone cameras nowadays, I understand they're really good. I don't use phone cameras hardly at all. And so I'm really horrible when it comes to talking about phone cameras, except I'm thinking about that iPhone 14, which I hear is a 50 megabyte raw file.
Wild.
I'd be interested in looking at it, but I don't know. There's something about holding a camera, maybe I'm old school, holding a camera, looking through the viewfinder, composing, instead of just holding up the thing. But, when autofocus, I learned photography when we were still in slide film. Is that what you call it here? Slides? What do you call the?
Yeah, for actual slides. Yeah.
Yeah.
Slide
You
film.
used to do that.
Sure.
A lot. Yeah. So and it used to be all manual focus. So when autofocus came in, I was like, nah, I'm not going to autofocus. That's crazy. How, I want to be able to tell where I want to focus. But, nowadays you got to have autofocus or I still use manual sometimes, but so maybe it's the same way with phones, phones, maybe it's just a matter of getting used to it. But I couldn't, people hand me their phones to take a picture for them. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't even know how to take a picture with a phone.
But theoretically, the principle should be the same, right? In terms of looking for light and capturing a composition and.
Yeah, but I'm also always cutting off feet or not looking in the background when I'm using the phone. When I'm composing with a camera, I'm checking everything: backgrounds, foregrounds, exposure, focus, everything. With a phone, you pretty much point and shoot. It does everything for you. So,
or maybe the tip here is trying to take the same approaches of a handheld camera to a phone and looking at that.
I don't know. I probably, if you ask me in a year, maybe I'll have a different look if I do get the iPhone 14 to play with.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
you know what the saying they say is the best camera is the one that you have with you. So that's one thing about an iPhone. You always have it with you, don't you?
Yeah, that is a good piece of advice in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Shirley lives in Portugal, and she feels that in the summer there's not much of interest to photograph because she doesn't feel very inspired by the dry, quieter in terms of fauna and flora landscapes. Any tips on how to photograph in less than ideal creative conditions, or in conditions where you don't feel as inspired?
When I'm in a place like that, I'll often stop and sit and watch, because if you're always moving around and you're always trying to find a different area or whatever, you're often missing something. And so it seems that like whenever I sit down, life just starts to come around. You start seeing, I'll sit in my garden out back and there's nothing there, and I'll sit down and 5 minutes later there's dragonflies and butterflies, and you'll see a frog in the pond, or you'll see, so less than ideal conditions. If you really want to shoot, maybe you practice, everything that you need to practice in order to be good with your camera, rather than just trying to take a good picture. Play with the focusing, play with the depth of field, play with the exposures, learn all the settings on your camera while you're out there shooting. And if you're not inspired to shoot, I'd put my camera away and sit down and just look and see what happens, see what comes up, look all around, and just enjoy the nature. If you're out in nature, even if it's dry and brown and everything, you're still out in nature. to me, that sure beats being in the middle of a city.
No, that's great advice. I think it's like going back to what you were saying earlier about patience.
Yeah,
and
patience
looking up and around.
right, being in the moment. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And we were looking at some amazing black and white photographs here, and you showed us some great night photography too. So it'd be great just to get a few tips on what you would recommend in terms of settings for both for nighttime wildlife photography and for black and white.
Well, that's a hard thing because nighttime, do you want to shoot stars? Well, you probably don't want to shoot stars here in London because you never see them. But when you're shooting stars, you have to, you're using a pretty high ISO, you know, maybe around 1600, 3200. I try to use as wide an angle as possible because the stars move. So basically, you have to be very careful on your shutter speed. When I'm shooting with a 15mm, I can't have any longer exposure than 30 seconds. If I do, all the stars will be moving. And if I'm using a 105, you can't shoot, you have to shoot maybe at about 5 seconds or less. So there's a calculation, and I don't have it right on hand right now, but there's a calculation depending on the lens that you're using, how fast your shutter speed has to be in order to freeze the stars. There's a lot of apps out there that will tell you where the moon will be when a planet will be somewhere at a certain time. And when you're shooting in a city, it's like totally different in a city. I mean, you're looking at different lighting. You might have really bright lights that you have to try and miss. Otherwise, they'll blow your photo out. It's pretty hard to give you like a specific setting because it really depends on the situation. And with today's digital cameras, you could test. Just keep testing. You could shoot. You know, you can either increase your ISO. Of course, you're shooting wide open, but maybe you want a little more depth of field. It means you got to have a longer shutter speed, but you just keep changing your settings until you get the effect that you do. It's not like you just sit down and put the settings in and boom. Like each one of your pictures I'm showing you here is probably one of 1,000, you know. I mean, it's like you just
wow, that many.
Well, I mean, you just shoot a lot. I mean, I probably shot at Stonehenge here, I probably shot 500 images, yeah. Because it was such a beautiful day, the light kept coming in and out. It was lovely. So
Nice.
and then this last week I was in the Peak, up in the Peak District just for a day, and it was like one of those days where the lighting wasn't really great. You know, it's not like super great lighting, but you just kind of try and make do with what you see at the time. What I did happen was here at these dunes, Southport, I think, has a massive dune area, really beautiful. And it was raining and sunlight was coming through and it was constantly changing. And I spent hours just watching the weather go through, and then, you know, rainbow come up, and then, you know, that would pass. And then you had this beautiful side light. And, you know, whenever you get stormy weather, you really get nice light. So when it's stormy, you guys get out and shoot, protect your equipment, but get out there and shoot, because you just got spectacular lighting. And I mean, I couldn't believe there's nobody there, you know, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. The dunes is an amazing place. I didn't see another person, and I saw a red squirrel, by the way, too.
They're not meant to come south of Scotland.
I know, but there was a red squirrel. I felt like I wanted to grab him and bring him back to my garden.
Conserve him, protect him. Now this is an incredible shot. Yeah, I think there's actually a bit of magic in England where people don't really go outside when it's stormy weather or when it's rainy, and
especially if it's scattered showers and that sun is. I don't know if I have another one here. Yeah, the sun's popping in and out, and you know where the rainbow is going to be, so you get ready for it. So I had another shot, but I didn't include it. It was very magical. Just everything was glowing because you have a dark sky, what you look for is contrast, right? I look for this contrast. And as you can see in this image, the contrast between the sky and the sand, it just catches your eye. And then the birds flying in front, you have that dark sky, you're always going to be able to find a good photo almost anywhere you look. If the sun's out and you have a dark sky, go for it. It's beautiful.
Are you doing a lot of editing on these images?
No, this was, what did I do on this? I might have increased the contrast just a little bit. That's about it. Contrast, and I might have used the shadow thing to bring out a little bit of the grass down here. Maybe this might have been a little bit darker. But other than that, no, you can see the sun hitting over here. That's sun on all the birds. So the sun's stopping. It'd been real nice to have a rainbow right there, but it wasn't there. But no, not a ton of editing.
And you use mainly Lightroom to do that? Or
Yeah,
do you use yeah, rather
No.
than Photoshop?
No, I can't. Well, I could use Photoshop if I'm prepping an image for like a gallery or to sell to a magazine or something like that. I might go into Photoshop and you know, do a little bit more, but basically no, I don't do a whole lot to the imagery.
That's good. I mean, yeah, Lightroom is pretty accessible, at least for
Yeah,
people
I
to get
think,
onto.
like in this one, I don't think I did hardly anything on this one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not to say that your photos are edited, but but yeah, that's incredible color. Like it's just the magic of capturing that light when
Yeah, and basically that's what I'm trying to do now, is look for these beautiful natural areas that I could go to. I think I've kind of exhausted London's parks for photography, and so I guess I'm branching out into national parks. The Peak District was nice, but Southport was really nice. Yeah. And
still yet to capture a hedgehog. That'll be the real winner, I'm sure, of London-based wildlife photography.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. There's just one final question I want to ask,
Sure.
which is what tips or advice would you give to a developing wildlife photographer on top of everything we've covered already?
You know, there's a lot, actually. You know what you could do is, number one, study other photographers, wildlife photographers that catch your eye. Ones that, you know, you go, wow, that's really a great shot. I want to learn how to do that. It'd be really great to find a photographer that you could tag along with. Not so much that he could teach you as you go, but just watching another photographer work. When I was first starting, I worked with a guy named Franz Lanting, and just watching him work gave me so many tips on, you know, how to utilize your camera and equipment and everything else. I look at a lot of photography books too. I love looking at photographs and what people did to capture those scenes. And your camera, you got to know your camera. If you're shooting wildlife, you can't be wasting time looking where the ISO dial is, or, you know, how to change your autofocus to a different setting, or to that's all got to be automatic. Just so as soon as you think it, you can dial it in, because wildlife is so quick, and you got to worry about focus. You got to focus. You know, a lot of wildlife photographers, when they start, they got really nice shots, but they're soft. So you got to put it on a tripod. You got to steady yourself. You got to use a cable release. I tell you what I do. I actually pile bean bags on top of the camera to stop shutter movement. When I'm using a long lens, I'll pile weight underneath the tripod, and then I'll pile a bean bag on top, so there's no shutter, no camera shake at all. And then in the old days, you used to use mirror up, but now you don't have to worry about that because of the mirrorless. And then you use a cable release, so you're not touching your camera.
Wow.
You know, that's to me, focus is what really separates a wildlife photographer, is when you got sharp focus, well exposed image. You know that he knows what he's doing. Just got to practice too, and study wildlife. You got to know where the wildlife is. You got to go to where they are, and then you got to sit and wait. they're, you know, you're just really lucky in England to find wildlife. That's for sure. In Belize, you don't have that problem. It's everywhere.
Just trip over a macaw.
Yeah,
No big
you
deal.
trip over. Yeah, you got to be careful there. But I haven't found a whole lot of. Well, I mean, biodiversity is down 50%, I think, from what, you know, just in the last 20 years. So you got a lot of work to do, and your group is great. I hope your group gets more vociferous. And
We're trying. And actually, thanks to we have some people on the call as well. We had our first photography exhibition actually as an organization in Oxford in July on British insects, which was really incredible to see that kind of young talent and developing talent and some really incredible shots. So
well, you know, if you go to the Natural History Museum, I think it's still there. The
best exhibition of the year, the
wildlife photographer of the year. That stuff is incredible. That'll really motivate you to get out and shoot because it's so beautiful.
It is.
Yeah.
Amazing. We are well over time, and we've had some really great questions in. So thanks to everyone who's submitted those. I'm pretty sure I got everyone, so I really apologize if I missed it. But hopefully, if I did miss your question, then it's been covered anyway. Thanks, Tony, for sharing all of your tips, your tricks, all of the incredible images that you've taken over the years. It's so great to be able to start off by seeing the images from Belize and then see the ones from the UK as well. And so we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks so much, everyone,
for having me. And everybody keep shooting.
Yeah, get out there, practice, sit in the rain, look for the lights.
Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Speak soon.